Welcome to Civics and Coffee, a history podcast, the show all about United States history, delivered to you in the time it takes to enjoy your morning cup of coffee. I'm your host, Alicia, a historian trained in United States history with a passion for telling both the known and unknown parts of America's past. So grab your coffee and get ready for some bite-sized history. Vigilance will not be for a moment relaxed. The prompt and courageous action of the police barely prevented a bloody riot. For had the mob gained the heart of the Chinese quarter, it would have been impossible to foretell the result. It is well understood that not only at present, but at all times, there is deep and widespread feeling among both laboring men and hoodlums against the Chinese, which only lacks a favorable opportunity to break out into open hostility. It is believed, however, that with prudence and vigilance, the immediate danger is over, and that if quiet can be maintained during the remainder of the night, there will be no further trouble. It is quite probable that in view of the present and possible future disturbance, efforts will be made to effect some organization among the better class of citizens looking to a maintenance of law and order. Sacramento Daily Union, July 24th, 1877. Hey everyone, welcome back. The Great Railroad Strike of 1877 was a defining moment in American history, marking critical changes politically, economically, and socially in the United States. It tested the nascent Hayes administration and brought to the surface the question of what should the appropriate relationship between labor and business be. It is one of the reasons I chose to cover it as one of the first episodes in my Gilded Age deep dive, and it's why several episodes keep tying back to the events of the strike. As the national economy shifted after the Civil War toward more industrialization and more Americans began working for somebody else, tensions grew and generated new questions about the meaning and value of work that would be debated for years, beyond the Gilded Age and stretching into the Progressive Era. In my episode about the Great Railroad Strike, I mentioned that out west, calls for a rally in support of the strike turned violent against Chinese laborers. I'm returning briefly to that tense summer of 1877 to expand on this anecdote and to explore the story of a brief political movement that managed to exert national influence even after its demise. I am talking about the mighty rise and rapid fall of the Workingmen's Party of California. How did it originate? Who was at the forefront? And how exactly did the party manage to impact federal policy? Grab your cup of coffee, peeps. Let's do this. The origins of the Workingmen's Party of California lie in the ashes of the fires that destroyed several Chinese washhouses that July evening in 1877. As word of the strike and the violence spread west, the Central Pacific Railroad, who had previously announced its own 10% wage cut, reversed course, hoping to avoid some of the wrath occurring across the country. It was a story of too little too late, and in San Francisco, the Workingmen's Party of the United States, a new national party, only a year old and based in Chicago, announced a rally on July 23rd in support of the strikers and to call for an end to government subsidies of the railroad. The rally was held in what was known as the Sandlot, a plot of several acres off of Market Street, across from an unfinished city hall. According to author Michael Liu, the area got its name thanks to the ankle-deep sand visitors had to stand in. The rally was well attended, attracting between an estimated 8,000 and 10,000 people, and speakers focused on their cause, an 8-hour workday and nationalizing the railroads. They had no intention of speaking about Chinese laborers or the quote-unquote Chinese question. Yet, there were agitators in the crowd focused on discussing only one thing: the Chinese. Members of anti-coolie clubs infiltrated the rally and began inflaming the group. And tensions were so high that when a Chinese man walked by the perimeter of the rally, he was singled out and knocked down by agitated attendees. When a police officer tried to assist, he too was attacked, and this seemed to be all that the mob needed, as several hundred broke off from the rally and charged toward the Chinese neighborhood known as Chinatown. Authorities had heard rumors that the rally was likely to turn violent and that there were plans to set the Pacific Mail Steamship Company's docks on fire for their role in importing Chinese labor. In preparation, San Francisco Chief of Police Henry Ellis deployed a team of 150 men to guard Chinatown and requested reinforcements in the form of 3 infantry regiments from the California National Guard. As night fell, the angry mass moved in to attack businesses and homes of Chinese residents. Between 20 and 30 Chinese owned wash houses were burned and several Chinese residents murdered. The mob, which started with just a couple of hundred men, grew in size to roughly 600, posing a formidable challenge to the city's law enforcement. Miraculously, the police were able to limit the damage, and the following day, the city's wealthy decided they'd pool their resources and establish a vigilante committee comprised of roughly 600 men who would be responsible for patrolling the city's streets to maintain law and order. They put up $75,000 to fund the effort, and the violence continued for several more days as more laundries were targeted with arson and additional reinforcements were called in, including a steamship carrying 10,000 rifles and 2 naval ships set to patrol the coast, ready to deploy Marines if necessary. The riots subsided after 3 days, but it propped open the door for a man to play upon racist tropes under the veil of a populist message, and to launch a political party that would influence a critical piece of federal legislation. Dennis Kearney was born in the County Cork, Ireland, in 1847, and took to the sea initially as a cabin boy in support of his family back home, which included his mom and 6 siblings. By the time he arrived in San Francisco on the ship the Shooting Star in 1868, Kearney had risen to the rank of officer, despite being barely able to read. Kearney worked on steamers out of San Francisco for a few years, getting married in 1870 and becoming a naturalized citizen in 1876. And while working on the docks, Kearney saved his pennies and eventually bought a drayage firm, earning a decent living until 1877. Kearney made his first appearance at the Sandlot just 2 months after the July riots on September 16th. In his speech, Kearney demanded that Chinese workers be fired to give white laborers a chance, and he followed that up with another speech less than a week later at Union Hall, where he said, quote, "We must settle this Chinese question within the next 2 years, or the system will have settled us. I say the people have a right to settle it, and if it becomes necessary, every free man in California has a right to keep a musket in his house and ammunition to use it." End quote. In Kearney's mind, it was the fault of rich capitalists who kept hiring Chinese and thus locking the white man out of a chance at economic prosperity. Kearney accused the rich of importing the Chinese to, quote, "create a propertyless class of New World serfs," end quote. He believed that the elite in California were set on recreating the old world aristocracy, and that relying on Chinese labor was a large part of their plan. Because of this, Chinese workers equated to little more than a plague that had to be rooted out. There are a few sources that indicate that Kearney and others held a preliminary meeting just days before his appearance at the Sandlot on September 12th to discuss the potential formation of a new political party. Kearney, who had tried to join the National Workingmen's Party, only to be denied over some derogatory comments he made about workers while he was a business owner, apparently discussed the idea of forming a California branch of the Workingmen's Party. The motivation behind establishing a new party came from the belief that the existing political structure did not have the common man's interests at heart, and that someone needed to address the growing problem of the Chinese. Now, it's worth noting here that as of the 1870 census, just under 50,000 Chinese lived in the entire state, roughly 1/12 of the population. And while Chinese workers were overly represented in the railroads, by 1877, they had largely moved into industries that were considered low or no skill trades, such as manufacturing, washing, or domestic service. The work available to the Chinese was dependent upon where they lived. Those in urban areas worked in the quote unquote sweated trades, while those living in the more remote areas of the state were largely limited to unskilled jobs in agriculture or construction. Overall, the Chinese represented a relatively small portion of the California population, but because they were willing to work for lower wages, they represented the one way business owners could cut costs, and thus were seen as a threat to the white working class. And, of course, a perfect political target. The Workingmen's Party of California was established at a meeting held at Dashaway Hall on October 5th, 1877, and Dennis Kearney, the fiery orator, was elected its first president. Included in the party's platform was their belief that more common men be part of the political process. Quote, "We propose to elect none but competent working men and their friends to any office whatever. The rich have ruled us until they have ruined us. We will now take our own affairs into our own hands. The republic must and shall be preserved, and only working men will do." End quote. Of course, the party platform also included demands to excise their plague, as they saw it, of competitive Chinese labor, writing into their platform, quote, "We propose to rid the country of cheap Chinese labor as soon as possible, and by all the means in our power, because it tends still more to degrade labor and aggrandize capital." End quote. Officially established, Kearney began hosting rallies every Sunday at the Sandlot, where he eventually adopted the infamous slogan, "The Chinese must go." Ending each speech with the racist demand, Kearney and the party's popularity surged, and crowds grew week over week. What started out as several hundred swelled to thousands, and the Workingmen's Party of California, or WPC, soon embraced the catchphrase and worked to increase their popularity by establishing a benevolent association for members. Kearney's rhetoric continued to escalate, and he demanded that the Central Pacific Railroad fire all Chinese workers within 3 months. The demand generated understandable fear within the Chinese community and prompted the Chinese Six Companies to issue a plea for protection. The Six Companies were an internal organization comprised of Chinese merchants who coordinated with American businesses to connect them with Chinese labor. The organization maintained its own rules, handling any disputes internally, but kept a number of SFPD on staff and lawyers on retainer to help recover any runaway laborers or handle any larger disputes. For newly arrived Chinese immigrants, the company provided a connection to their homeland, offering a place to enjoy traditional food, recreation, and women's company. It also tried to provide protection for its members, including during the escalating tensions as a result of Kearney's demand to expel Chinese labor. Worried about the potential threat to the community, the Six Companies issued a call to authorities on November 3rd, 1877, asking for protection and indicating that, quote, "As a rule, our countrymen are better acquainted with peaceful vocations than with scenes of strife. Yet we are not ignorant that self-defense is the common right of all men, and should a riotous attack be made upon the Chinese quarter, we should have neither the power nor disposition to restrain our countrymen from defending themselves to the last extremity and selling their lives as dearly as possible." End quote. That same day, Kearney made another public appearance where he was arrested for inciting violence. Kearney would later be acquitted, which only seemed to further embolden him, causing him to remark that he was fully committed to expelling the Chinese, quote, peaceably if we can, forcibly if we must, end quote. Kearney and the WPC's popularity was on full display during a parade on Thanksgiving. Beginning at 10 in the morning, the march was held to demand the expulsion of the Chinese and to show the party's strength. Local Chinese businesses closed for the day, barricading their doors and windows in an effort to safeguard themselves from vandalism. Estimates place more than 7,000 participants in the parade, carrying a host of racist signs aimed at the Chinese. A local paper, The Examiner, said of the parade that it was a, quote, great demonstration against coolie labor, end quote. By the new year, Kearney and the WPC were seen as a formidable political force. Although originating in San Francisco, the party's message spread throughout the greater Bay Area and started traveling south. WPC candidates successfully swept 10 senatorial districts, netting 30 seats, while picking up another 21 seats in other districts. Pressure from the WPC was one of the contributing factors in the state legislature's decision to authorize a second constitutional convention. Thanks to its popularity, the WPC was able to send about a third of the delegates to the state constitutional convention. But cracks were already beginning to form, and Kearney was facing some competition from within. While he remained focused on expelling the Chinese, another member, Frank Rooney, wanted to focus on other, more egalitarian economic demands. This split led to the two factions hosting separate state nominating conventions, and only after some arm twisting by Kearney's supporters did the group fall back under a single banner. While Kearney's supporters were able to intimidate some into their camp, they were not able to convince the other delegates at the convention to adopt many of their positions beyond the Chinese exclusion and establishing a railroad commission to oversee the Central Pacific Railroad. The WPC enjoyed additional electoral successes in 1879 before simply falling apart. By 1881, the Workingmen's Party of California was practically non-existent. And yet, despite being little more than a flash in a pan politically, Dennis Kearney and the Workingmen's Party of California were successful in turning the quote-unquote Chinese problem of California into a national Chinese question. How would the federal government respond to the growing demands for Chinese exclusion coming from the West? What solutions could they bring forward, and how would they impact existing agreements like the Burlingame Treaty? I think you know how this one ends, dear listeners, but we'll get into that when I talk about President Chester A. Arthur. Before I sign off today, I want to give a heartfelt thank you to Elle for her donation through Buy Me a Coffee. Thank you. Donations get reinvested into the show and go towards things like hosting and platform fees, and I very much appreciate the support. You too can support the show either through Buy Me a Coffee or via the Patreon or via my affiliate shop on bookshop.org. Learn more about it on my website at www.civicsandcoffee.com. And of course, don't forget, I will be giving a talk next week at History Camp in Boston. I look forward to seeing you. Thanks, peeps. I'll see you next time. Thanks for sitting down with me as I explored this chapter of American history. If you liked what you heard, be sure to subscribe and share with your friends. I look forward to our next cup of coffee together.